My name is Frank Callahan, and I build things that are meant to last. Bridges that span chasms, skyscrapers that touch clouds, foundations that laugh at the seismic tantrums of the San Andreas Fault. I deal in absolutes, tensile strength, shear stress, load capacity. For 35 years, my life has been a quiet testament to the power of a solid plan and flawless execution. My hands are calloused. My face is a roadmap of Southern California's sun, and my demeanor, as my wife Amelia often said, is dependably dull. I took it as a compliment. Dependability is the highest virtue in my profession. It was a Saturday, the kind of clear, placid morning in Palos Verdes where the ocean is a sheet of glass and the only sound is the distant hum of a lawnmower. I was detailing Amelia's car, a pearl-white Mercedes S-Class. It was a ritual, a form of meditation for me. The methodical process of washing, claying, polishing, waxing, it was about control, about restoring order to a small corner of the universe. I find comfort in process. I was finishing the interior, vacuuming the plush carpets, when my hand brushed against something under the passenger seat. It was a small tube, sleek and minimalist, black with silver lettering. I pulled it out. It was a high-end personal lubricant. The brand was unfamiliar, something you'd find in a boutique in Beverly Hills, not the CVS where we shopped. I stood there for a long moment, the California sun warming the back of my neck, the tube feeling cold and alien in my palm. There was no rage, no sudden, hot flush of betrayal. That's not how my mind works. When an engineer finds a stress fracture in a steel beam, he doesn't get angry at the steel. He gets curious about the load. My mind simply began connecting data points, assembling a quiet, cold schematic of the truth. Amelia's recent late-night charity board meetings. Her newfound passion for tennis, which apparently required lessons 3 times a week with a private coach I'd never met. The way she'd started locking her phone, something she'd never done in 25 years of marriage. They were all small, insignificant observations on their own. But together, with this tube in my hand, they formed a blueprint of infidelity. The structure of my life, the one I believed was built to withstand anything, had a critical flaw. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront her. A confrontation would have been messy, emotional, and ultimately unproductive. It would have produced denial, excuses, tears, unreliable data. I needed a load test. I needed to apply a specific, measurable stress to the system to see exactly where and how it would fail. I walked to my workshop at the back of our property. It's my sanctuary, a cathedral of order and potential energy. On one wall hang blueprints for a downtown high-rise. On the benches, tools for applying force and for measuring resistance. I went to a locked metal cabinet, the one where I keep the specialized materials. Solvents, resins, industrial-grade compounds. I found what I was looking for. A tube of Titan Weld 9000. It's a 2-part, rapid-curing epoxy resin adhesive. We use it to anchor rebar in a load-bearing concrete. Once it sets, it's easier to break the concrete around it than to break the bond. The tube was almost identical in size and shape to the one from her car. Using a set of precision tools and a syringe, I carefully emptied the contents of the lubricant tube into a waste container. I cleaned it meticulously with a solvent, leaving no residue. Then, just as carefully, I refilled it with the clear, viscous Titan Weld epoxy. I screwed the cap back on and wiped it clean. It was perfect, indistinguishable from the original. I walked back to the Mercedes, the sun now higher in the sky. I placed the altered tube back under the passenger's seat, exactly where I had found it. I closed the door, the solid, reassuring thud echoing in the quiet morning. As I coiled the hose from the pressure washer, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. People think revenge is a passionate act. They're wrong. True, lasting consequences are born not from heat, but from cold, dispassionate calculation. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was engineering a solution. My line of work teaches you that every structure has a point of failure. Sometimes you have to apply pressure just to see where the cracks are. I was about to apply pressure. I didn't spend the next few days waiting for the inevitable. Waiting is for amateurs. I work. My office looks out over our terraced garden, a calm, orderly space filled with the scent of drafting paper and the quiet hum of a large-format plotter. I was finalizing the sequence for a controlled demolition of the old 6th Street Viaduct. It was a complex job, a ballet of precisely timed charges designed to bring tons of steel and concrete down into a neat, manageable pile. I find the deconstruction of things to be as elegant as their creation and far more honest. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. The sound came first. It wasn't the familiar, urgent wail of an LA County Fire ambulance, the kind you hear screaming down the 405. This was a different sound. Higher pitched, more discreet. The sound of a private service, the kind the wealthy call when they want to keep things quiet. But quiet was no longer an option. A moment later, it was joined by the guttural roar of a full-sized fire engine, its air horn blasting a path through the sleepy suburban streets. I put down my pen, capped it with a soft click, and walked to the window overlooking the street below. The scene was exactly as I had calculated, yet somehow more vivid. The flashing red and white lights painted garish, frantic strokes across the perfectly manicured lawns and terracotta roofs of my neighbors' homes. There was Amelia's Mercedes, parked at a strange angle, halfway up on the curb about 100 yards down the block. A small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Gable from across the street, holding her iPhone up like a tiny silver shield. The 2 teenage Chun boys, who should have been at soccer practice, mouths agape. The firefighters weren't using the jaws of life, but they were working methodically on the passenger side door. I watched, my face betraying no emotion, as they helped a man out of the vehicle. I recognized him instantly. Julian Croft, our wealth manager, a man with teeth too white, a smile too practiced, and a handshake that always lingered a fraction of a second too long. His well-tailored suit, a ruin of charcoal gray wool, was bunched up around his waist. His perfectly tanned face was a grotesque mask of agony and utter, world-ending humiliation. He couldn't straighten his legs. He was hunched over, moving with a pained, shuffling gait as 2 paramedics supported him. Then I saw Amelia. She was wrapped in a fire department blanket, a boilerplate symbol of victimhood. But I could see her face clearly. It wasn't fear or concern for her lover. It was a storm of pure, uncut shame and white-hot fury. And I knew, with the certainty of an engineer who has just watched a rivet pop on a stress test, that all of it was directed at me. She didn't know how I'd done it, but she knew who. An affair is a secret. A secret is a form of structural integrity. It relies on hidden supports and the assumption that no one is inspecting the foundations. I had just removed the load-bearing wall, and I wanted everyone to watch the roof cave in. The public nature of this failure wasn't a side effect. It was a core component of the design. Julian Croft's reputation was built on an image of slick, untouchable success. That image was now bleeding out on a suburban sidewalk, surrounded by gawking neighbors and recorded on a dozen smartphones. I watched them load him into the private ambulance. I watched Amelia give a frantic, high-energy statement to a patient-looking police officer. I saw her glance up towards our house, her eyes scanning the windows, searching for me. I stepped back into the shadows of my office. The show was over. Now came the damage assessment. I walked back to my drafting table and picked up the viaduct demolition plan. Phase 1, the initial blast, had been a success. The primary supports were compromised, but a compromised structure is the most dangerous kind. It's unpredictable. I knew Amelia would be home soon, and she would be a storm, but that was fine. A storm provides a wealth of data, and I needed more data before I placed the next series of charges. The sound of the front door slamming was the overture. It wasn't the usual, gentle click of a well-oiled latch. It was a percussive blast, a sonic shockwave that vibrated up through the floorboards. I remained in my office, seated at my large oak desk, my hands resting calmly on the cool, smooth surface. I was reviewing a geotechnical survey for a new foundation in Century City. The report detailed soil liquefaction risks, seismic vulnerabilities, the hidden weaknesses beneath a placid surface. It felt appropriate. Her footsteps on the travertine tiles in the hall were rapid, heavy, like hailstones on a tin roof. The door to my office flew open and crashed against the wall. "You," she hissed. Amelia stood in the doorway, the fire department blanket gone, her designer clothes rumpled. Her face was pale, except for two bright red patches of fury on her cheeks. Her eyes, usually so calm and expertly made up, were blazing. I slowly looked up from the report, my expression neutral. "Amelia, is everything all right?" I saw the commotion. The question was a lit match dropped on a puddle of gasoline. "All right. Is everything all right?" She shrieked, her voice cracking. "You sick bastard. You did this. I don't know how, but you did this." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply watched her. In my line of work, you learn to let unstable forces expend their own energy. A hysterical client, a panicked foreman, a raging wife. The principle is the same. You remain the calm center. You provide a solid object for the kinetic energy to smash against until it dissipates. They had to cut him out of the car. "Out of his pants," she screamed, taking a step into the room. The paramedics, the firemen, the neighbors, Frank, the Gables were filming it. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I'm not sure I do," I said, my voice even and low. "Why don't you tell me?" Her attack was a wildfire of accusations, but in her rage, she was careless. She was giving me everything. She wasn't apologizing. She was justifying. "He understands me," she yelled, tears of anger, not remorse, streaming down her face. "He sees me. He doesn't just look at me like I'm another well-maintained part of the property. He listens. He makes me feel alive, something you haven't done in 20 years. Data point 1. The affair was emotional. An escape from perceived neglect. And Julian is important. He manages money for half the people in this town. His reputation is everything. You've destroyed him. Data point 2. His reputation is his primary asset. Public humiliation is a critical blow. Then came the crucial piece of information. The one I had been waiting for, though I hadn't known its shape. "And you probably ruined us, you stupid, petty man," she spat. "You know that special fund he set up for me? The one that was going to secure our future, a future outside of your dusty blueprints and dirt piles? He was leveraging that. He was closing a huge deal, a deal for us. Now everything is frozen, all because you couldn't handle the fact that I found a little happiness." I felt a cold stillness spread through me. It wasn't an alarm bell. It was the silent, instant understanding an engineer has when he sees a hairline fracture in a primary support column. This wasn't a simple affair. It was an infestation. The parasite wasn't just in my bed. He was in my bank accounts. I let her tirade continue until it wound down into ragged sobs of frustration. She had given me the entire schematic of her betrayal and, more importantly, of his methodology. He hadn't just seduced my wife. He had gained control of our assets. The special private fund was his weapon, and he had aimed it at the very foundation of my life's work. When she finally fell silent, exhausted and heaving, I looked at her. The anger in my own chest was a cold, dense thing, like a block of granite. But my voice remained steady. "You're right," I said quietly. She looked up, surprised, the tears still wet on her cheeks. "You're right," I repeated. "I haven't been paying attention. I've been focused on my work. It's my fault for not seeing the structural weaknesses in our marriage. I need some time to assess the damage. I'm going to go to the site in Nevada for a few days. Check on the project there. We'll talk when I get back." It was a lie, of course, but it was a necessary one. She saw it as an admission of guilt, a retreat. It was exactly what I wanted her to see. She nodded, a flicker of smug victory in her eyes, and turned and left the office, leaving me in the silence. The problem was now clearly defined. It was bigger than infidelity. It was a hostile takeover attempt. And Julian Croft had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He thought he was dealing with a boring, passive contractor. He had no idea he had just tried to swindle a master of demolition. And I was about to teach him the difference. The Nevada trip was a fiction designed for Amelia. My real destination was a place far less glamorous. A drab, anonymous industrial park in the city of industry, squeezed between a wholesale plumbing supplier and a textile importer. Inside a roll-up metal door was my real office, the one Amelia knew nothing about. It wasn't an office in the traditional sense. It was a command center. There was no polished oak desk here, just steel tables, a bank of monitors, commercial-grade servers humming quietly, and walls covered in corkboard and whiteboards, ready for schematics and flowcharts. This was my think tank, the place where I broke down my most complex projects, not into concrete and rebar, but into problems of pure logic. For the next few days, Julian Croft and his special fund would be my project. I locked the door, the deadbolt sounding like a cannon in the silence. I poured a cup of thick black coffee from a perpetually warm pot and sat down in front of the monitors. The first call was to a number I hadn't dialed in years, a number I knew by heart. It rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Yeah, Sal, it's Frank Callahan." There was a pause. I could picture him, Sal Peterman, sitting in a dimly lit room that smelled of stale cigars and regret. A retired LAPD detective, now a private investigator who operated in the legal gray areas. We had a history from a project in the 90s, a building in a bad part of town with some very complicated ownership issues. Sal had helped clear the way. "Frankie," Sal's voice crackled, a hint of surprise in his tone. "Long time. Everything's still standing, I hope." "Not everything, Sal," I said. "I have a new demolition project. A parasite. Human or insect? Is there a difference?" There was a dry chuckle on the other end. "Specs. Name is Julian Croft. Calls himself a wealth manager. Operates in the Palos Verdes, Newport Beach area. I need everything you can find. Financial history, professional history, personal. I want to know where he was born, what he ate for breakfast, and every skeleton in every closet he's ever owned. I also need you to find the corporate filings for a private fund he's managing for my wife. I'll wire you the details and a retainer. This an official job, frank or off the books? It's a structural analysis, Sal. Just give me the blueprints. I'll handle the demolition myself." "You got it," he said, and the line went dead. With Sal digging from the outside, I began my work from the inside. For the next 36 hours, fueled by coffee and a cold, disciplined anger, I plunged into the labyrinth of our finances. I wasn't just a contractor. I had built a multi-million-dollar business from the ground up. I knew my way around a balance sheet. Using forensic accounting software I normally reserve for auditing my own company's books, I followed the digital trail of Amelia's special fund. It wasn't a fund. It was a fiscal black hole, a complex network of LLCs and shell corporations, each one registered in Delaware or Nevada, designed to obscure ownership and confuse the flow of money. It was slick professional work. Croft was no amateur. Small amounts had been siphoned off for months, maybe years, management fees, consulting charges, 1,000 here, 5,000 there. The kind of financial bleeding you don't notice until you're anemic. But recently, the pattern had changed. 3 weeks ago, a massive transfer had occurred. A 7-figure sum, the bulk of our liquid investment portfolio, had been moved from our conservative blue-chip Vanguard account into one of these shell corporations. My hands were steady on the keyboard as I traced the transaction. The money hadn't just been moved, it had been collateralized, leveraged, pledged against a massive, high-risk commercial real estate development in the Arts District of downtown LA. I pulled up the property records, the zoning applications, the investor prospectus. It was a house of cards. The project's valuation was wildly inflated, based on zoning variances that hadn't been approved and anchor tenants who hadn't signed any leases. It was a classic pump-and-dump scheme, designed to lure in investors, artificially inflate the value on paper, and then collapse, leaving the initial schemers rich and the collateral holders, me, with nothing. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the servers filling the silence. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking in its audacity. This wasn't just an affair, it was an execution. Julian Croft hadn't just been sleeping with my wife. He had been preparing to financially annihilate me. My phone buzzed. A text from Sal. It was a link to a secure, encrypted file. I opened it. It was a dossier, and it was worse than I imagined. Sal's report was a masterclass in digging up ghosts. Julian Croft wasn't his real name. He'd been born Justin Crawford in Gary, Indiana. There was no Wharton MBA, as his glossy brochure claimed. There was a 2-year stint at a community college and a series of low-level jobs at boiler room stock brokerages in the Midwest, each one ending just before the SEC showed up. He had reinvented himself on the West Coast, buying the suits, the car, the teeth, and the smooth patter of new money. The dossier was a graveyard of broken lives. Sal had found at least 4 other women, all fitting the same profile, wealthy, in their late 40s or early 50s, married to successful but emotionally distant men. Each story was a carbon copy. The whirlwind romance, the feeling of being seen for the first time in years, the suggestion of a special investment opportunity to give her some independence, and then the inevitable financial ruin. 2 of the women had lost their homes. One had a nervous breakdown. All the cases had been settled quietly, with ironclad non-disclosure agreements. The women too humiliated and their husbands too eager to avoid a public scandal to press criminal charges. Croft was a predator who thrived in the shadows of shame. I looked at the names. Catherine Gable, not our neighbor, but a woman from Newport Beach. Divorced, lost her art gallery. Eleanor Vance, a widow from Santa Barbara. Her husband's entire estate gone. These weren't just names on a page. They were the silent, invisible victims propping up Julian Croft's lavish lifestyle. He hadn't just stolen their money. He had stolen their trust, their dignity, their futures. He thought he was insulated by their silence. He was wrong. Silence can be weaponized. I closed Sal's file and opened a new one on my own system. My approach to demolition is surgical. You don't just blow a building up. You weaken its key supports in a precise sequence, creating a chain reaction that makes the structure collapse under its own weight. Julian Croft's structure was built on 3 pillars: his fabricated reputation, the stolen capital he used for leverage, and the fear and silence of his victims. I was going to dismantle all 3. My first call was to a man named Marcus Thorne. I didn't call him, of course. I had my executive assistant schedule a meeting with his, citing a need to discuss a seismic retrofitting proposal for his property in Malibu. Marcus Thorne was a shark, a titan of old money real estate who ate men like Julian Croft for breakfast. He was also a primary investor in the Arts District project. My name and my company's reputation for discretion and excellence would get me in the door. My second action was more delicate. I forwarded Sal's dossier to a burner email account. Then, through an anonymized server, I sent a simple, untraceable message to Catherine Gable and Eleanor Vance. It contained no threats, no call to action. It simply contained a link to Sal's file on Julian Croft, and a second link to a news article about the Arts District development, highlighting the list of key investors. The last line of the email was concise. He's using your money to do it again. Then, I went one step further. I had Sal research the top litigation attorneys in L.A. specializing in financial fraud. I found a most ruthless one, a woman named Jessica Reyes, known for her scorched earth tactics. I wired her a substantial retainer from an anonymous corporate account with a simple directive: represent Catherine Gable and Eleanor Vance. No settlement. Go for blood. I was creating external stress points, pushing on the walls from the outside. I wanted Croft to feel the pressure building, to start making mistakes. I wanted him to be looking over his shoulder, to be distracted, so he wouldn't see the real attack coming. I spent the rest of the day in my command center, mapping out the Arts District deal on a whiteboard. I drew lines connecting investors, shell corporations, city officials. It was a tangled mess, but like any complex structure, it had a keystone. A single point that, if removed, would cause the entire arch to collapse. I just had to find it. By the time I left the industrial park, the sun was a dying orange ember on the horizon. I drove home, back to the quiet, pristine streets of Palos Verdes. I felt no fatigue. I felt a sense of clarity, of purpose. I was no longer just a man whose wife had cheated on him. I was a structural engineer who had discovered a profound and dangerous flaw in the city's infrastructure. And I was the only one with the blueprints and the will to bring it down safely before it hurt anyone else. The demolition had begun. The pressure began to work faster than I anticipated. 3 days later, Julian Croft showed up at one of my job sites. It was a testament to his arrogance, or perhaps his desperation. The site was the skeletal remains of a 40-story office tower in downtown L.A. We were stripping for a full seismic refit. It was a raw, chaotic world of exposed steel beams, dangling wires, and the constant shriek of grinding metal. It was my world. I saw him coming from my perch in the site office on the 25th floor, a glass box clinging to the side of the building. He was comically out of place. His gleaming Italian loafers were coated in a layer of gray dust before he'd made it 20 feet from his Tesla. His crisp, white shirt was already wilting in the heat. He was a creature of air-conditioned boardrooms, and I had dragged him into the guts of the machine. I told my foreman, a grizzled old pro named Mac, to send him up in the external hoist, the rickety, open-air cage used for hauling men and materials. I watched it ascend, a slow, rattling journey that I knew would unnerve him. When he stepped into my office, he tried to project an aura of command, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted around nervously, taking in the blueprints taped to the walls, the view of the city sprawling below, the sheer vertigo-inducing drop just beyond the thin glass. "Callahan," he said, skipping any pleasantries. "We need to talk." "Mr. Croft," I replied, not standing up. I gestured to a dusty plastic chair opposite my desk. "I'm surprised to see you here. This doesn't seem like your natural habitat." He ignored the chair and the jibe, planting his hands on my desk and leaning forward. It was a textbook power move. "Cut the crap. I know you're behind this." Two of my former clients suddenly decide to file a joint lawsuit after years of silence, coordinated by some legal barracuda I've never heard of. That's not a coincidence. I leaned back in my chair, my expression unreadable. I let the silence hang in the air, punctuated by the roar of a cutting torch from the floor below. I wanted him to feel the imbalance of power. He was on my turf, a place governed by the laws of physics, not financial jargon. "Lawsuits," I said, my voice laced with mild curiosity. "That sounds stressful. You should be careful. Stress can cause catastrophic failure in poorly designed systems." His jaw tightened. "Don't play dumb with me. And I know about the little incident with your wife. You think you're clever, don't you? That little stunt is going to cost you. Assault. Malicious endangerment. I'll own you." I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile my crews recognized meant someone was about to learn a very expensive, very permanent lesson. "Let me show you something, Julian," I said, finally standing up. I walked him to the edge of the office, to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the vast skeletal interior of the building. 40 stories of steel framework plunged into the depths below. "You see this building?" I said, my voice calm, almost instructional. "It was built to stand for 100 years, to withstand an 8.0 earthquake. It's a fortress. But in 3 weeks, we're going to bring it down. Not with a massive explosion. That's crude. We'll do it with a series of small, precisely placed charges. We identify the key load-bearing columns, the transfer girders, the points of maximum stress. Then we sever them in the right sequence. The building's own weight does the rest. It collapses into its own footprint. A controlled, elegant demolition." I turned from the window and looked him dead in the eye. He had taken an involuntary step back from glass. "You see, everything has a structural flaw, Julian. Every person, every business, every fraudulent real estate deal. The trick is not to attack the facade. You have to find the load-bearing columns. You have to find the invisible weaknesses that hold the whole rotten thing up." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "It's all about finding the right frequency, the one that creates a resonance cascade. You introduce a small, almost invisible vibration, like, say, an anonymous email to a couple of women you screwed over. And if you've done your calculations right, the whole thing just collapses on itself. I'm very good at finding that frequency." The color had drained from his face. The slick veneer of the wealth manager had cracked, and for the first time, I saw the scared kid from Gary, Indiana, standing in a place he didn't belong, completely out of his depth. The threats of lawsuits were gone, replaced by a primal fear. He understood now. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a demolition countdown. Stay away from my business, he stammered, his voice thin. Your business is built on a foundation of my money, I said, my voice turning to ice. Which makes it my business. You have 48 hours to unwind the deal and return every single cent to the shell corporation it came from. If you don't, I will push the button. He stared at me, his mind racing, trying to find an angle, a threat that would work here, in this place of raw power and unyielding physics. He found nothing. He turned and practically fled from the office, fumbling for the button to call the hoist. I watched him descend, a small, shrinking figure in a cage of his own making. The load-bearing test was complete. I had confirmed the structural instability. He was rattled, predictable, and predictable men always run to their last line of defense. I knew exactly where he would go and what he would do next, and I would be waiting. The final charge was almost in place. Predictably, Julian didn't unwind the deal. Men like him are incapable of retreat. They only know how to double down. He believed my threat was a bluff, an attempt to scare him into folding his winning hand. He couldn't comprehend a strategy that didn't involve personal profit as its ultimate goal. He saw my actions as emotional, the lashing out of a cuckolded husband. He failed to see the cold, structural logic behind them. His 48-hour deadline came and went. Sal confirmed it through his sources. The closing for the Arts District property was still on, scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. Julian was pushing ahead, trying to get the deal signed and the money laundered through the project before the lawsuits could freeze his assets. It was his only move. It was also the final, fatal mistake I had engineered him to make. The last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place the night before. I had been awake for 2 days, meticulously tracing the tangled web of ownership behind the Arts District property. The seller was a faceless LLC, but after peeling back 5 layers of corporate veils, I found the fault line I was looking for. The land wasn't just being sold to the investment group Julian had assembled with my money. It was being sold with the implicit, backroom promise that the city of Los Angeles would then repurchase it at a grossly inflated price as the site for a new municipal complex. The deal hinged on a zoning variance and a discretionary vote from the City Planning Commission. And the deciding vote on that commission belonged to a councilman named Robert Miller, a man with a modest public servant salary, 2 kids in expensive private schools, and a brand-new vacation home in Lake Arrowhead, purchased 6 months ago by a trust fund whose sole trustee was Julian Croft's sister. That was the keystone, the single point of corruption holding the entire fraudulent arch together. Friday morning arrived, cool and overcast. I wasn't in my command center. I was at home, in my quiet office overlooking the garden. I had a single sheet of paper on my desk with 3 names and 3 phone numbers. The demolition sequence was set. The charges were placed. All that was left was the detonation. At 9:55 a.m., I pictured the scene. Julian Croft in a glass-walled conference room on the 50th floor of a skyscraper on Bunker Hill, the pinnacle of his success. He would be surrounded by the other investors, the lawyers, the city officials. He would be smiling that perfect, predatory smile, the closing documents laid out before him like a feast. At precisely 10 a.m., I picked up my phone and sent a single, pre-written text message to Sal. Vibration 1. In that same moment, miles away, Jessica Reyes, the attorney for Catherine Gable and Eleanor Vance, would be electronically filing an emergency injunction and a civil RICO lawsuit against Julian Croft and all his known corporate entities. The filing, citing a pattern of racketeering and fraud, will be automatically served via email to every single person in that conference room, including the investors and the bank's lawyers. The first, jarring tremor. At 10:02 a.m., I sent the second text. Vibration 2. Sal from a laptop in a coffee shop across town would then leak his entire, meticulously documented dossier on Councilman Robert Miller, the offshore bank statements, the deed to the Lake Arrowhead house, the photos of him meeting with Croft, to a hungry, Pulitzer-hungry investigative reporter at the Los Angeles Times he'd been cultivating for just such an occasion. A deeper, more damaging shockwave. The ground beneath their feet would now be fundamentally unstable. Then I waited. I gave the chaos a moment to marinate. I imagined the phones buzzing, the lawyers whispering urgently to their clients, the dawning confusion and suspicion on the investors' faces. I imagined Julian's smile faltering, the sweat beginning to bead on his brow as he realized this was not a simple legal nuisance. At 10:05 a.m., I made the one and only phone call myself. The kill shot. I dialed the private number of Marcus Thorne. His assistant answered. "Mr. Thorne's office. This is Frank Callahan. He's expecting my call." I wasn't lying. I had left a message the day before, following up on our Malibu retrofitting discussion, stating I had discovered a critical structural flaw that required his immediate attention. A moment later, Thorne's gruff, impatient voice came on the line. "Callahan, this had better be good. I'm in the middle of a closing." "I know you are, Marcus," I said, my voice calm and devoid of emotion. "And I'm calling to inform you that the foundation of the deal you're about to sign is fraudulent. The collateral pledged by the lead manager, Julian Croft, is stolen capital. The city's buyback guarantee is contingent on the vote of a compromised councilman who is, as we speak, the subject of an expose being written by the LA Times. You're not buying a property, you're buying a federal indictment." There was dead silence on the other end of the line. Marcus Thorne was a man who had built an empire. He was ruthless, intelligent, and, above all, he hated being made a fool of. "Prove it," he finally growled. "Check your email," I said, and hit send on a message containing a single, password-protected PDF. It was my own dossier, a clean, concise engineer's report detailing the entire scheme with irrefutable evidence. The money trail from my accounts, the corporate links to Miller, the inflated property valuation. It was a blueprint of the crime. I didn't need to hear anything else. I didn't need threats or thanks. I simply said, "My apologies for the interruption, Marcus," and hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to my window. I couldn't see the skyscraper on Bunker Hill, but I could imagine the scene inside that glass room with perfect clarity. The resonance cascade, the small, invisible vibrations I had introduced had now amplified each other, creating a catastrophic failure. The arrival of Thorne's own legal team, storming the room like a SWAT team. The panic phone calls, the accusations, the dawning, sickening horror on Julian Croft's face as he watched the entire structure of his life, his reputation, his stolen money, his very freedom, disintegrate into dust and rubble around him. The house had been brought down, and it had collapsed directly into its own footprint, just as I had designed. The aftermath wasn't a single explosion, but a series of controlled implosions that echoed through the financial and political corridors of the city for weeks. Marcus Thorne's vengeance was as swift and brutal as I had predicted. He didn't just pull his funding. He unleashed a legal and financial blitzkrieg that was a thing of terrible beauty in its efficiency. Men like Thorne don't file lawsuits. They wage wars. Julian Croft wasn't just ruined. He was systematically erased. The SEC, prodded by Thorne's army of lawyers, froze every asset he had, both real and fabricated. The district attorney, smelling a high-profile corruption case, unsealed a grand jury indictment within a week. Councilman Miller resigned in disgrace before the LA Times article even hit the front page, a preemptive surrender. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a series of headlines and news alerts on my phone. Prominent wealth manager arrested in sweeping fraud investigation. City Hall rocked by corruption scandal. It was like watching the dust clouds settle after a major demolition. There was a sense of finality, of a dangerous structure safely brought to the ground. There was no joy, no celebration, just the quiet, profound satisfaction of a job well done. I spent those days in my workshop, meticulously cleaning and oiling my tools. I disassembled my grandfather's antique Transit, cleaning each brass and glass component, restoring it to perfect working order. It was a meditative process, a way of bringing order back to my own small universe. The final meeting with Amelia took place a month later, not in our home, but in the sterile, beige conference room of a divorce mediator's office in Century City. The fury had long since burned out of her. In its place was a vast, hollow emptiness. The woman who sat across the polished table from me was a stranger, her face etched with a confusion so deep it looked like a physical ailment. She had finally seen the full extent of Croft's deception, the sheer scale of the financial abyss he had prepared for us. She understood that I hadn't just exposed her affair. I had saved the very foundation of the life she took for granted. The anger was gone, but the bridge between us was an impassable chasm. For a long time, she said nothing, just stared at me. Her gaze was different now. She wasn't looking at the dependable, dull contractor anymore. She was trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the silent, devastatingly capable force she now knew me to be. "Who are you, Frank?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was the most honest question she had asked me in a decade. I looked at her, and for the first time since I'd found that tube in her car, I let a flicker of something other than cold analysis into my eyes. Not pity, not anger, but a profound and weary sadness for the structure we had built and then allowed to decay from within. "I'm the man who built the house you lived in," I said, my voice low and even. "The one with foundations that could withstand a 9.0. I'm also the man who made sure it was still standing when the earthquake finally hit. The papers were already drawn up. I was fair, more than fair. I had saved our fortune, or what was left of it, and I ensured she would have a comfortable, independent future. But the contract of our marriage, the one we had both so thoroughly violated in our own ways, was terminated. There was no rebuilding this. Some structures are too compromised. The only responsible thing to do is tear them down and clear the site. The final scene of my old life was not that sterile office. It was 6 months later. I was standing on a bare patch of land, a graded bluff in Malibu overlooking the Pacific. The air was sharp with the scent of salt and coastal sage. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the raw, churned earth. In my hands, I held not a demolition plan, but a new set of blueprints. It was a house, smaller, simpler, more honest than the one in Palos Verdes. It was all clean lines, glass, and exposed steel I-beams, a structure that wasn't afraid to show how it was built. I wasn't just the engineer on this project. I was the client, the architect, and I would be the builder. I was going to set the forms and pour the concrete myself. I was going to raise the walls with my own 2 hands. A home built by myself, for myself. People think strength is about holding things together, about resisting the forces that try to tear you apart. They're wrong. I spent my life studying stress and failure. I know the truth. Real strength is about knowing what's too broken to save. It's about having the clarity to see where the fault lines are, the precision to know where to place the charges, and the courage to push the button. Only then can you clear away the rubble. Only then can you find solid ground and begin to build something true.